Decades earlier, the world twisted into something unrecognizable. Monstrous eyes tore open the sky, and terrified crowds scattered through the streets. Vicious ghosts poured into every city, dragging humanity into the mythical era. Survivors fought back with whatever strength they could summon. People began awakening professions, archers, mages, warriors, each gaining unique skills to raise their rank. Awakened fighters clashed against beasts, defending humanity's last footholds. A lone warrior raised his blade high, proving the era belonged to awakened professionals. At Haicheng High School, the awakening ceremony finally began. Instructor Lu Hu declared the ritual would decide every student's destiny. He hoped each one would awaken the profession they truly desired. Feng Zhou, a transmigrator, waited patiently for his long-delayed moment. Called forward, he stepped up without hesitation, answering firmly. Classmates whispered that Feng Zhou would surely awaken as a priest, given his looks. Others argued looks meant nothing without a strong profession behind them. Records revealed him as an orphan of martyrs, gifted in both fitness and academics. Such achievements explained why so many eyes followed him. Stepping onto the platform, he triggered the ritual, and his eyes flashed crimson. A violent burst of light erupted, stunning every onlooker nearby. Dark, swirling energy exploded outward, tearing through the sky above him. The instructor gasped, realizing this reaction defied heaven itself. Shadowy tendrils coiled around Feng Zhou as the phenomenon intensified. The system finally confirmed it. His profession was Necromancer. Confirmation settled in as he confirmed his newly awakened profession. Nearby classmates burst into laughter at the announcement. They mocked him openly, calling Necromancer the weakest combat class among all professions. A stranger noted its fatal flaw. It demanded deep connection with the undead realm. Skeletal figures loomed as he considered how rarely humans grasped that realm. Confidently, he declared himself an exception among ordinary necromancers. Suddenly, a hidden system activated, granting him undead realm experience. Recognizing this power instantly, he called it his long-awaited golden finger. The system explained he could explore the undead realm through a skeleton clone, devouring creatures to grow stronger. Convinced completely, he realized this system was built exactly for a necromancer like him. Summoning his clone, he recognized the armored skeleton as his avatar within the undead realm. Devouring other undead creatures let it grow stronger, promising endless summons through repeated kills. Declaring the entire realm his hunting ground, he stood ready to claim it. Choosing to save deeper exploration for later, he ordered the system to summon it instead. Light surged violently as the summoning ritual activated. Manifesting fully, the towering skeleton emerged beside him in reality. Calling it his strongest summon, he introduced the clone openly. Meanwhile, the instructor called forward another student, Bai Xiaochan. Classmates encouraged him warmly, admiring the skeleton's imposing design. Jealous rivals sneered nearby, dismissing his profession. Despite his growing popularity, secretly, a rival plotted to shatter the summoned skeleton, hoping to cripple its leveling progress. Preparing a silent arrow technique, he aimed directly at the unsuspecting Bone Guardian. Firing swiftly, he demanded its destruction, but the skeleton reacted instantly. Vanishing from sight, it left him stunned by the sudden disappearance. Reappearing above him, its blue eyes locked onto his position. Striking with brutal force, it slammed him against the ground. Bleeding and dazed, he questioned how this defeat happened. Crawling weakly, he demanded answers from Feng Zhou nearby. Baffled further, he realized the summon detected hidden attacks despite a supposedly weak master. Launching another desperate strike, he screamed for its destruction once more. Feng Zhou raised his palm without hesitation. Lu Renjie lunged with a blade, his scream cut short by a surge of dark energy, calling him arrogant. Feng Zhou answered with a single crushing punch. A skeletal figure loomed behind him as Lu Renjie collapsed, blood spilling across the field. Students scattered in shock, staring at the broken body left behind. Bored, the towering skeleton vanished, leaving Feng Zhou to walk away calmly. A teacher demanded answers, learning that Lu Renjie had tried a sneak attack and lost instantly. Furious and humiliated, Lu Renjie vowed revenge through gritted teeth. Later, Feng Zhou returned to his room, summoning his hidden system in private. The system asked if he was ready to enter the undead realm again. Feng Zhou reminded himself that this mandatory training would let him understand undead creatures and grow stronger, though doubt lingered beneath his confidence. He acknowledged the danger ahead, knowing risks and rewards always came together, then ordered the system to begin. 18 years of waiting had led to this moment, and he refused to let the chance slip away. A warning flashed, asking whether he truly wished to proceed despite the unknown danger. Without hesitation, he confirmed his choice. A surge of energy pulled him into a shifting green void. Silence stretched across a blood-red wasteland scattered with bones and ruin. A towering skeleton emerged, identical to the one he once summoned, revealing its stats and an instinctive skill called skeletal armament. Fang Zhou questioned whether this power belonged to it naturally. He realized this must be the very ability his clone had used before. Cautious of the towering beast lurking nearby, the skeleton resolved to forge a weapon before facing any threat. Before he could finish, a pack of snarling wolves lunged from the shadows, jaws bared and ready to strike. Twin wolves lunge through fire and smoke, jaws snapping as their prey collapses beneath their claws. A skeletal warrior rises, glowing eyes fixed on the beasts, sensing danger hidden across the undead realm. Claws rake his bones apart, and his foot tangles mid-strike, throwing his balance into chaos. Steadying himself, he raises a blade, whispering a threat before launching into another assault. His strike splits through fur and bone alike, cutting down one wolf in a single merciless sweep. The second wolf shrugs off a kick without flinching, leaving the skeleton startled by its resilience. Blades clash again and again, his control over the fragile skeletal frame slipping with every exchange. A mound of bones catches his attention, hinting at battles fought long before his arrival. More wolves emerge, eyes burning red, surrounding him as the fight grows more desperate. Power surges through his weapon, and with one final strike, he ends the beast's assault. Wolves and skeletons collide in a blur of fangs and bone, blows landing on both sides at once. Elsewhere, a young man in a black coat clutches his side, wincing as blood seeps through his fingers. He realizes wounds suffered in the undead realm bleed straight into his own body, proving the system far more dangerous than expected. Undeterred, he decides the wolf head before him is already dead, and simply takes what it offers. Gripping the severed head, he vows to bend even death itself into something that serves him. Chains of bone erupt from his frame, lashing outward and coiling around the beasts still standing. The chains crush and drag his enemies down, each strike tightening his hold over the battlefield. Surveying the wreckage, he admits the skeletal armament proves far more useful than he first imagined. A true gift from the system. A strange blue flame flickers within the smoke, catching his notice as something unfamiliar stirs nearby. Kneeling beside the flame, a gnawing hunger rises inside him, one he cannot yet explain. Lightning surges through his bones as devouring the wolf head triggers a violent, powerful evolution. Blue flame roars from his jaw, consuming the last remnants of his fallen prey. A green glow descends, marking an attribute upgrade rippling through his skeletal form. Strength climbs by a fraction, the system confirming his slow but steady growth. Soul power appears next, leaving him to wonder exactly what this new resource can do. Converted from soul energy, it proves useful for deducing skills, boosting potential, and enhancing gear. Silhouettes of beasts flicker across the sky, embodying the path ahead: explore, slaughter, devour, evolve. Eyes narrowing, he vows that as long as the hunt continues, his strength will never stop rising. Standing atop a ridge of bone, he declares his growth has no limit, an endless climb toward power. Nearby, another figure studies him coldly, recognizing him as a mere summon, fragile and mindless, its only weakness hidden in the soul fire within. A message flashes across the sky, confirming the successful forging of a new weapon, the Bone Spear. Wielding the spear, he strikes down another enemy, gaining agility and soul power in the process. Another blow lands, granting further gains in constitution and soul power as his strength compounds. Firelight catches on bone and blade alike, each piece of gear now bound to his growing power. Reviewing his stats, he mutters that it still isn't enough. Certain greater strength lies within reach. Daylight returns to Haisheng High School, its halls quiet under an ordinary morning sky. Walking the corridor, he repeats his vow to grow stronger. Unaware, a classmate walks beside him. Startled by her voice, he snaps back to reality, caught between two worlds colliding. Bai Xiaochan questions his presence, noticing the blood staining his glove as concern crosses her face. Mistaking his wounds for self-harm, she scolds him, insisting no failed profession is worth hurting himself over. He sighs inwardly, realizing this girl completely misread his wounds, vowing to find quieter battlegrounds next time. Brushing off her concern, he insists it was only a careless scratch. Though she remains unconvinced, a chime interrupts them, warning that meditation class is starting, so they hurry back together. Blood suddenly drips from his hand and she gasps, insisting he needs the infirmary at once. He forces calm into his voice, though a hidden warning tells him the undead realm is straining his body. A notification catches his eye, revealing his own attributes have risen alongside his summoned skeleton's growth. Studying the message closer, he notices a deducible skill attached to his summon ability. Watching visions of powerful awakened figures, he wonders if he too might forge his own unique skills. Inside Haicheng High School's teaching building, a hidden lesson prepares to unfold behind ordinary classroom walls. Shen Hongyu, a fire mage draped in ember-colored robes, addresses the room and introduces herself as the meditation instructor for the class. She explains that each student must use a meditation method tied to their own profession, then demonstrates how spiritual energy can be channeled through focus alone. She adds that meditation strengthens spirit power, the very foundation every professional skill depends on. Turning toward Fang Zhou, she admits that even someone as gifted as her needed half a month of training just to reach this basic stage. A prompt flashes before him, detecting a learnable skill called the Skeleton Meditation Method, asking whether he wishes to begin. Without hesitation, Fang Zhou reaches out and accepts, and a surge of green light erupts around his head as the process begins. His face splits between two worlds, human on one side, skeletal on the other, as crackling energy tears through him. The system confirms success, and he learns the skill faster than expected, silently marveling at his own progress. A description appears explaining that this apprentice-level method builds spirit attributes through visualizing a skeleton, a concept he finds oddly fitting. In the undead realm, his skeletal clone speaks, calling the visualization nothing more than glancing at itself. Back in the classroom, Fang Zhou realizes his clone trains automatically even when he isn't present, meaning his cultivation never truly stops. Another notification informs him that his spirit ability has grown enough to re-enter the undead realm. Though he reminds himself not to neglect either form's training, he triggers the undead realm experience once more, letting the world shift beneath him. His skeletal eyes glow blue as a lone undead figure approaches through the ashen wasteland. The clone lunges forward, blade flashing, earning small gains in constitution and soul power from the clash. Satisfied, the skeleton declares it can hunt freely again, energy sparking around its jaw. A new message appears, revealing that a clone's skill has reached instinct-level proficiency, capable of being used to deduce an unknown skill for his main body at the cost of 10 soul power points. The skeleton notes that such deduction can only happen within the undead realm, connecting the pieces of the system's earlier hint. With hands pressed together, the skeleton begins the deduction, determined to unlock whatever power lies hidden within. Green light swirls around a floating question mark as the deduction process analyzes what new power might emerge. The result arrives, a skill called Bone Javelin, and the deduction is confirmed successful. The description explains that this apprentice-level ability condenses a bone javelin capable of piercing armor while dealing death energy damage, its strength scaling with spirit attribute and proficiency. The skeleton notes it matches the weapon he already forged. A skill tree unfolds beneath it, branching into Bone Shield, Giant Bone Claw, and Bone Prison, and he marvels that the system even granted him derivative paths. Watching smaller undead shuffle past, he realizes he needs to gather far more soul power to progress further. Spotting a group of enemies, he grins at the timing, deciding to test his new skill on them as a massive bone spear erupts from his grip. The javelin tears through the air and slams into his target, and he admits this attack far outclasses lesser apprentice skills like Death Missile or Ray of Enfeeblement. After the kill, his attribute gains from small skeletons shrink, agility and soul power, rising only slightly, prompting him to question why the returns have dropped. Checking his stats, he sees modest growth in strength, constitution, agility, and spirit, realizing the system won't let him grind weak enemies forever, pushing him to venture into more dangerous territory. Standing among his summoned skeletons beneath a blood-red moon, he vows to devour more low-level undead before his growth from them runs dry completely. Back in the classroom, Fang Zhou quietly chuckles to himself, catching Shen Hongyu's attention as she turns toward him. She snaps at him for slacking off while everyone else meditates, and he stumbles over an excuse under her sharp gaze. A blonde classmate, Lu Renjia, jumps in to mock him, claiming Fang Zhou simply can't meditate at all, while another student questions whether rare professions should perform better. Lu Renjia explains that almost no one awakens as a necromancer, and the skeleton meditation method they receive is considered incomplete, guessing it must be especially hard for Fang Zhou to focus. Shen Hongyu adds that struggling with meditation is no excuse to give up, reminding him his inaction is wasting the whole class's time. Lu Renjia shows off a small blade he shaped through meditation after just one session, brushing off her praise as something any average genius could achieve. He turns to Fang Zhou with a smug smile, declaring he must now understand the gap between necromancers and stronger professions. Fang Zhou calmly replies that such speed is indeed quite average, stunning both Lu Renjia and Shen Hongyu with his blunt response. Lu Renjia snaps back, telling him to worry about his own failure to meditate instead of talking big. Suddenly, a violent surge of green energy erupts behind them, and as everyone turns, Lu Renjia shouts for people to step back while gasping in shock at what appears. Shen Hongyu snaps toward the rising force, calling out to Lu Renjia and ordering him to focus his mind before it spirals further. She demands to know why Fengzhou would unleash such power during meditation class instead of saving it for combat training, but he calmly explains he only meant to make Lu Renjia step aside. With a faint smile, he adds that he simply wanted to show his teacher his true meditation progress. A silver-haired classmate looks over in disbelief, wondering aloud if Fengzhou actually succeeded, while another student scoffs that even success would only mean 1/10 of the entry stage. Fengzhou's expression hardens as the skeleton meditation method surges within him, dark energy bursting outward. The force rips through the room, sending gusts tearing past startled classmates as everyone stares in shock. Shen Hongyu raises a hand against the wind, stunned that within a single class period he has already reached the entry stage of the skeleton meditation method, standing amid the swirling power with his skeletal clone looming behind him. Fengzhou muses that at this rate, he must be far beyond an average genius. Later, a bearded instructor bursts into the room, remarking that his meditation progress looks impressively solid. The man announces a test the next day, catching Fengzhou off guard as he questions what kind of test awaits him. The next day, students react with surprise upon learning combat class has arrived so soon, with Fengzhou admitting he hasn't even reached the entry stage of his own meditation method. Lu Renjia smirks, reminding him that combat class plays by different rules than meditation, taunting him to see how long he can keep up his act as a supposedly weak mage in the depths of the undead realm. Skeletal figures shuffled through a blood-red wasteland, while Fengzhou's clone advanced with two skull-shaped serpents coiling around him, ready for another day of hunting. Reaching the entry stage of the skeleton meditation method had extended how long he could remain in this world, giving him more time to grind before his spirit power ran dry. Gripping his scythe, the skeleton refused to rest, pushing himself to eliminate as many undead creatures as possible before his strength gave out completely. With a fierce cry, he launched himself at another enemy, his blade cutting through the air as bone scattered from the impact. Sparks flew as his weapon clashed against a spectral foe, each strike fueled by his demand for more power and more kills. Waves of undead fell beneath his assault, their remains torn apart as he pressed forward without hesitation. Eventually, his breathing grew ragged, and he admitted that his spirit power for the day was nearly spent as he stood among the scattered remains of his victims. A notification appeared before him, announcing that his professional level had risen and his skeleton clone had grown stronger. A small comfort proving his relentless effort hadn't been wasted. Confirming the upgrade, his clone's form shifted and intensified, green energy surging around him as a mysterious question mark flickered above the transformation. His eyes glowed a brighter blue as the enhancement settled into both his skeletal form and his true body, marking real progress at last. Far from that grim battlefield, Haicheng High School's sports field buzzed with ordinary students going about their day beneath a clear sky sitting alone. Fengzhou clutched his head in pain, muttering that his spirit power was still far too weak despite everything. A concerned classmate asked why he'd looked so unwell since meditation class, but he brushed it off, insisting he'd simply practiced too much, all while silently vowing to keep his secret hidden and train alone from then on. Nearby, two students mocked him, calling Necromancer a worthless profession, and insisting strength alone gave a class any value. The girl defended him, but one of the boys kept pressing, claiming he was only speaking the truth. The bully grabbed him, sneering and asking if he wanted another beating, unaware that Fengzhou was no longer the same person he'd bullied. A week earlier, confident in a newly learned skill, the blonde student boasted that a single move would be enough to finish him off. Before the fight could escalate, a teacher's sharp voice cut through the tension, ordering everyone to stop. The instructor reminded them that their training existed to fight dangerous spirits, not each other, leaving the bully to mutter a reluctant apology. Walking off with the girl beside him, Fengzhou was told to keep working on his combat class results, and he answered simply, determined to keep growing stronger. Watching the teacher's retreating figure, Fengzhou noted quietly that the man seemed to be looking out for him, though he kept the thought to himself. Teacher Lu's voice boomed across the field, calling everyone to assemble, and the students hurried into formation without complaint. He instructed his assistant to bring the equipment forward, and the young man beside him confirmed the order at once. A group of curious students peered over as the covered object was wheeled out, wondering what awaited them. The reveal showed an apprentice-level test golem, its horned head grinning as its screen displayed attack and defense values of 100, meant to gauge the student's combat capabilities. Teacher Lu explained that the numbers were calibrated against the weakest Abyss Demon unit, the IMP, whose claws required a defense of 100 to block directly. When Fang Zhou's turn came, an explosion of fire erupted as he unleashed his attack against the golem. The result left him stunned at only 48, far below what he expected given how much power he felt he'd poured into the strike. Another student rushed forward with the scythe, unleashing a crippling strike that tore into the golem's frame. Right after, an archer loosed a glowing arrow labeled Petrifying Arrow, adding another mark to the golem's growing damage. Once the common professions finished their turns, Teacher Lu called for the special professions to step up in order. Two disappointed students lamented that none of their scores had even reached 60, guessing that their teacher's generosity earlier had been out of pity since none of them stood a chance at the 20 contribution points, and they wondered how much higher the hidden professionals would score. Fang Zhou considered that his own attacks depended entirely on his skeleton and quietly wondered whether the golem's damage values could be added up cumulatively across multiple hits. A blonde classmate smirked beside him, remarking that his hesitation clearly meant his attack power sat at the very bottom of the rankings. Confident in his new skill, the same student rushed forward, boasting that Fang Zhou would soon see the gap between them. His strike, Phantom Dagger, slammed into the golem and pushed its counter to 80, prompting him to declare himself Lu Renjia, wielder of the hidden profession Phantom Assassin, and to sneer that Fang Zhou wasn't the only one who'd awakened something special. Teacher Lu then called forward another student, Yi Fan, who answered eagerly and stepped up for his turn. Whispers spread through the crowd as students recalled that Yi Fan's awakened profession, Demon Hunter, had earned him a spot with the school's top researchers, stirring envy among his classmates. Curious about his numbers, green lightning crackled around a massive curved blade as Yi Fan summoned his weapon, energy surging through his frame. With a fierce cry of vengeance strike, he launched himself at the golem, his blade carving through the air and slamming into its body with tremendous force. The counter settled at 65, prompting two watching students to mutter that the number barely surpassed their own. Clearly underwhelmed by what they expected to be a stronger showing, refusing to stop there, Yi Fan's eyes flared green as he declared it wasn't over, launching straight into a follow-up assault. The display jumped to 69 as he tore through the air with a vengeance combo, his blade slicing again and again into the golem's frame. Moments later, the number surged past 88 and locked at a full 100, his weapon roaring through one final blow that pushed the golem to its limit. Teacher Lu announced the result aloud, confirming Yi Fan's attack capability had reached 100. While Fang Zhou watched quietly and realized the values could be added up across multiple strikes, concluding that breaking a test golem himself might not be so far out of reach after all. The class gathered on the training field, students murmuring as instructors prepared the day's test. Whispers spread through the crowd, wondering who would prove strongest. Yi Fan stood confident under the open sky, certain that no one in his class could match him. A blonde classmate mocked the scoring system, claiming he could have racked up more points with repeated strikes. A silver-haired girl beside him questioned how an assassin class had unlocked a combo skill at all. The instructor called the next name. Bai Shanchan stepped forward nervously, facing the mechanical testing puppet standing ready. Gathering her breath, she declared herself a hidden class user, unwilling to lose face in front of everyone watching. Her body spun through the air, wind and leaves swirling violently around her strike, as she unleashed her full power. The result flashed above the puppet. Attack capability 31. She cursed under her breath, frustrated that a support class produced such a weak number. The blonde student laughed loudly, boasting that if he had awakened an assassin class, his score would easily surpass 80. The instructor moved on, calling for Gu Jiqiu next. Known as the Storm Mage, Gu Jiqiu unleashed a chain wind energy missile, twin streams of light tearing through the air. His score reached 72. Zhao Yuan, the Earth Knight, followed with a shielded charge that shattered against the puppet's armor, registering 69. Chen Yong, the Heavy Hammer Warrior, swung with brutal force, his hammer impact scoring 84, the highest so far. Students murmured that despite these strong numbers, no one had broken 100, meaning their teacher's contribution points would go unclaimed. One added that a hidden class holder had yet to be tested. All eyes shifted toward a quiet figure walking across the field. Someone confirmed it. The final tester was Fang Zhou. A necromancer. The blonde student sneered, doubting a necromancer could even reach 10 points, questioning whether his summoned skeleton could stand upright at all. Fang Zhou passed by calmly, only asking if his rival was certain he couldn't earn the 20 contribution points at stake. The blonde student scoffed, daring him to break the puppet, promising to eat it on the spot if he succeeded. Fang Zhou reminded him of his own words with a faint smile, unbothered by the challenge. Stepping onto the field, he asked the crowd to step back, sensing the scale of what he was about to unleash. The blonde student demanded to know if he feared embarrassing himself with poor results, only to be met with a sharp denial. Chains of dark energy erupted around Fang Zhou, lightning cracking across the night sky as his skill expanded, needing far more space than anyone expected. Skeleton warriors loomed behind him, their hollow eyes glowing as cackling laughter echoed through the dark, chains rattling with every motion of his summoning. His classmates froze, stunned that 10 skeletons had answered his call. They recalled that a newly awakened apprentice, tier Necromancer, could usually manage only 2. Someone recalled Su Xinyan, history's most talented necromancer, who at her own awakening had summoned just 5 skeletons at most. Watching the swirling energy around him, onlookers wondered aloud whether Fang Zhou's talent had already surpassed hers. He kept his expression calm, admitting quietly to himself that he had held back, worried that showing more would draw far too much attention. With a single word, he gave the order, and his skeletal army surged forward toward the puppet. Zhao Yuan barely dodged the sudden onslaught, startled by how fast the bones moved, despite their fragile frames. Metal fists collided again and again, sparks and light bursting from each impact as the puppet struggled to withstand the assault. Numbers climbed rapidly across the display, 30, 45, 60, 65, each strike layering onto the last A classmate. Noted that the commotion looked impressive, yet the final number wasn't particularly high compared to expectations. Another argued that 65 was still respectable since plenty of warriors couldn't even reach that mark. But someone else pointed out that with so many skeletons combined, necromancers remained relatively weak overall. The blonde student scoffed loudly, mocking the total as unimpressive, insisting a single skeleton barely managed 10 points on its own. Fang Zhou only smiled, telling him this had barely begun. The blonde student tensed, demanding to know if he was preparing some desperate last effort. Raising his hand, Fang Zhou declared that if 10 weren't enough, he would summon 20 instead. The silver-haired girl gasped, realizing he had been holding back the entire time, questioning if any necromancer in history had ever shown such strength. The puppet's core cracked under repeated blows, numbers spiking violently as the skeleton horde tore through its defenses. Its display flashed past 100, lightning crackling wildly across its shattered frame. A massive explosion tore through the sky, forcing the crowd to shield their eyes from the blinding light. Some Oni shouted that the puppet's upper limit had been broken entirely, insisting Fang Zhou couldn't possibly be human. The blonde student stood frozen, staring at the wreckage in disbelief, unable to comprehend how any newly awakened student could achieve something so impossible. He picked up the shattered head of the puppet from the ground, holding it up calmly before speaking. With a faint smirk, Fang Zhou told him he could eat it now, just as promised. The blonde student stammered, caught off guard, unable to form a proper response. Fang Zhou's eyes flashed violet as he coldly told him to vanish from his sight forever. Gritting his teeth, the blonde student declared he would prove himself again someday, then stormed off across the field. The silver-haired girl leaned close, begging him to reveal his cultivation method, insisting he was far too strong to stay quiet about it. He brushed it off casually, claiming it was nothing more than ordinary meditation training. His teacher approached, praising him warmly, admitting the display had truly opened his eyes. Gripping his shoulder, the teacher vowed to fight for a spot on the school's key cultivation seed list on his behalf in the principal's office. The headmaster reviewed the year's results, noting that out of 10,000 freshmen, 9,103 had successfully awakened. He continued listing the rare class holders: Zhao Yuan, the Earth Knight; Bei Shanchan, holding String of Chanting; Gu Jiqiu, the Storm Mage; and Yi Fan, the Demon Hunter. Considering the 100 key cultivation seed slots, he noted these 85 talents would qualify automatically. Yet flipping to Fang Zhou's photo, he paused, muttering that a necromancer with no real future should still be excluded from the list. Footsteps echoed through the principal's office as Instructor Liu pushed the door open, stack of papers in hand. The principal glanced up from his desk, surprised to see a combat teacher abandoning his own classroom. Liu wasted no time on pleasantries and declared he had an urgent matter to report. The principal asked what could possibly justify such urgency. Liu flipped through the papers until he found the one he wanted, a triumphant note in his voice as he announced he had found it. He held the document up, revealing the name Fang Zhou beside the label Necromancer. Lu pressed his case immediately, insisting the boy be added to the school's seed list without delay. The principal rubbed his temple. Unconvinced, he admitted the necromancer profession carried real potential on paper, but experience had taught him how rarely that potential translated into results. Still, he conceded that Major Sinyan proved an exception, her combat strength rivaling any other mage. He credited that success to himself, claiming years spent personally shaping her growth. Then his tone sharpened as he turned the question back on Lu, demanding to know what qualifications this Fang Zhou actually possessed. Lu set the papers down and reminded the principal of an older bond, one tied to Fang Zhou's parents. The two of them had fought side by side once, recognized across the Federation as genuine heroes. The principal turned toward the window, watching the campus below. He acknowledged that a place on the seed list carried weight far beyond resources alone. It came bound to responsibility, and that was not something to hand out carelessly. Lu answered by extending the reports from Fang Zhou's meditation and combat sessions, letting the results speak instead of arguing further. The principal's eyebrow lifted with quiet interest, scanning the pages, his composure cracked. He read that the boy had mastered the skeleton meditation method during his very first class, then confirmed he had already summoned more than 20 skeletons in live combat. Turning back toward Lu, the principal admitted such talent could reshape the entire history of necromancers. He agreed to end the debate there, choosing instead to judge Fang Zhou once the simulated battlefield opened. Alone with the file, he studied the photo a moment longer, murmuring the name to himself and admitting he wanted to see exactly what tricks this boy could pull off. Elsewhere on campus, a girl caught up to Fang Zhou across the courtyard, curiosity pulling her voice louder as she asked how he had managed it. She pressed closer, marveling that anyone could summon so many skeletons during a first combat class. Fang Zhou brushed it off simply, calling it nothing more than a slightly larger summon. She teased that false modesty was its own form of arrogance. He laughed the comment away, insisting he genuinely didn't think it amounted to much. Behind him, skeletal warriors clashed in a blur of bone and steel, a private display of power. Fang Zhou smiled faintly, admitting to himself that what he'd shown barely scratched the surface of his real strength. As he walked on, another voice called out from behind, urging him to wait. The girl turned first, curious, while a stranger approached with clear intent. The newcomer, red-haired and confident, declared he had never once felt weaker than anyone in his life. His eyes locked onto Fang Zhou, naming him the only person in the entire class worthy of standing as his opponent. The girl fell silent, caught off guard by the sudden challenge, while Fang Zhou's expression shifted into open confusion at the unexpected demand. Fang Zhou brushed the offer aside without hesitation, saying he had no interest in entertaining a challenge from someone acting like an overblown fantasist. The girl muttered under her breath that the stranger seemed like a strange one indeed, as he lunged forward shouting for them to wait. Undeterred, the red-haired youth clarified his intention, insisting this wasn't meant as a simple challenge but a request for Fang Zhou to become his sparring partner. Fang Zhou turned halfway, repeating the phrase back with quiet skepticism, unsure what to make of the sudden proposal. Yi Fan explained his purpose, revealing that after awakening the rare profession Demon Hunter, he had joined the Demon Hunter Scientific Research Group. The ongoing research required a sparring partner of equal strength, and that necessity had brought him here. Fang Zhou remained skeptical, tilting his hand outward as he questioned why he should bother cooperating with someone else's research at all. Yi Fan answered without hesitation, holding up his thumb and offering 10 contribution points, enough to cover 2 full weeks of sparring along with room and board included. The two shook hands on the spot, Yi Fan grinning as he called it a pleasure, doing business behind them. The girl looked on in visible disbelief that Fang Zhou had agreed so easily. Yi Fan wasted no time, urging them to skip the formalities and follow him right away. She caught up and voiced her confusion directly, asking how Fang Zhou could accept a deal from someone acting like such an obvious Chunabiu. He shrugged the comment off, pointing out that 10 contribution points was nothing to dismiss. His gaze drifted sideways as he added a quieter reason, admitting that people back home probably needed the resources more than he did right now. She wondered aloud whether Yi Fan came from wealth, calling him unusually generous for a stranger. Fang Zhou corrected her, explaining that Yi Fan wasn't rich at all and that every point offered had been advanced to him by the Research Association itself. She pressed further, surprised that people from the association would be so generous with their funding. Fang Zhou clarified, it wasn't a gift but a loan. One Yi Fan would eventually have to repay. Watching Yi Fan walk ahead of them, Fang Zhou noted dryly that given his spending habits, the man would likely still be paying off debt 20 years after graduating. She murmured in realization, finally understanding the situation. They arrived at a tall glass building, and Yi Fan gestured for them to hurry inside without delay. Once through the doors, he led them into the laboratory itself, spreading his arms proudly as he asked what they thought of his research group's workspace. Feng Zhou studied the surroundings, quietly impressed by how well equipped everything appeared, noting that rare professionals clearly received extraordinary treatment here. A man with a mechanical arm greeted them warmly, introducing himself as Chen Qingshan, a silver-level Gale Ranger, and the person responsible for overseeing the Demon Hunter Research Association. The girl offered a polite greeting in return, while Fang Zhou simply nodded, taking in the scientists standing before them, studying Chen Qingshan's prosthetic arm. Fang Zhou sensed something unexpected beneath the researcher's calm exterior, an aura that spoke of real frontline combat despite his current role. Chen Qingshan continued, mentioning recent news from the Abyss Mystic Realm, where another human demon hunter had reached the legendary crown and successfully slain an Abyss Lord, a feat that demonstrated tremendous combat power. He explained that Yi Fan's awakening of the demon hunter profession had drawn serious attention from Haicheng Military Academy, prompting them to form this research group specifically to develop his potential further. Turning his attention to Feng Zhou, Chen Qingshan revealed that he had already reviewed his files as well, making clear this meeting was no coincidence. He offered further incentive, suggesting he could establish a small research association of Feng Zhou's own if he showed interest. Feng Zhou raised his hands with a nervous smile, quickly declining the offer. Feng Zhou's smile lingered as he admitted quietly that he had no intention of spending the next 20 years paying off debt after graduation. Chen Qingshan accepted the refusal without protest, suggesting instead that they move straight into the actual combat research, gesturing toward the octagonal arena below. Descending the stairs together, he assured them that meticulous safety measures had already been put in place, allowing both fighters to focus entirely on the battle without fearing for their lives. He added that to fully unleash their combat power, each of them would be permitted to select 3 pieces of equipment from the armory before the match began. Watching Yi Fan from across the arena, Fang Zhou assessed his opponent's strength, noting that his impressive speed and burst damage posed a real threat to his summoned skeletons. Green light surged around him as he decided the moment called for skill deduction, channeling points directly into raising his own combat power. The system responded with a burst of energy, upgrading Summoned Skeleton, while sharpening Bone Javelin to level 2 and refining Bone Shield to its first level. Nearby, Yi Fan hung up his jacket and revealed he had recently mastered the Bladed Bow's weapon mastery skill, declaring with confidence that even 20 summoned skeletons wouldn't be enough to match him. Fang Zhou answered with a faint smile, admitting that might be true for now though, after investing his points the outcome could look very different. His status flared into view: Necromancer, Apprentice, lower rank, with skills in Skeleton Meditation, Summon Skeleton, and now a mastered Bone Javelin alongside a proficient Bone Shield. Raising his hand as green flames wrapped around his sleeve, he voiced a quiet hope that his opponent wouldn't disappoint him, equipping the plain apprentice staff and robe issued for the fight. Inside the Demon Hunter Research Association's training hall, Fang Zhou grips his curved green blade and eyes his opponent with a confident smirk. He calls the man his rival, and admits his composure is impressive. Across the hall, Yi Fan walks forward calmly, a skull-topped staff resting against his shoulder. Green energy crackles around Fang Zhou's body. He declares that the enhancement given to him by the research group surpasses anything Yi Fan can imagine, and lightning-like power surges from his fist as he leaps into a battle stance. In an observation room above, 3 researchers watch the match unfold. One predicts Yi Fan's victory, citing how often he has interacted with him this week. Another adds that Yi Fan's combat instinct is the most terrifying they've ever witnessed. A green-haired researcher in glasses turns to a bearded man who has just entered, remarking that judging the outcome so early shows impatience. He questions why the bearded man called Old Lu has come to observe. The bearded man explains that 2 outstanding students from his class are fighting, so as their teacher he must watch. The green-haired researcher is surprised, asking if Old Lu truly believes Fang Zhou can defeat Yi Fan. Old Lu confirms it firmly. Reviewing a document, the researcher notes that Fang Zhou can summon many skeletons, but his body remains fragile as a mage. He hints that something more lies beneath the surface of this match. He continues, revealing that Yifan mastered an extremely powerful displacement skill just the day before, one that could catch Fang Zhou off guard. Old Lu reacts with visible interest. Back on the battlefield, Fang Zhou swings his massive scythe-like weapon at Yifan, who pivots away with practiced speed, narrowly avoiding the strike as the green blade slices through the air. Yifan sprints across the arena, water erupting behind his footsteps. He reminds himself that Yifan's close combat strength is dangerously high, so keeping distance is essential to survive the exchange. Fang Zhou charges his weapon with surging blue energy, warning that distance alone won't guarantee safety. The blade hums with barely contained power as he prepares his next assault. He unleashes the demon hunting arrow, launching a torrent of blue energy streaks that tear through the arena, forcing Yifan to dash and weave between the deadly projectiles. Yifan's eyes flare green as he begins his own casting. A skull materializes beside him, followed by a summoning circle that calls forth 2 towering skeleton warriors from the ground. The skeletons charge instantly, moving with unnatural speed. One deflects an incoming attack with its bony arm while pressing forward to close the gap. Fang Zhou raises his scythe defensively, thinking he must interrupt Yifan's summoning rhythm before more skeletons can join the fight. A sudden explosion of light disrupts the summoning circle beneath Yifan. He grits his teeth, realizing his casting has been interrupted mid-motion. Yifan twists through the air, narrowly dodging another volley of piercing attacks. He mutters that it was close, sparks scattering around his coat as he regains his footing, refusing to stop. Yifan raises his hand once more. A massive summoning circle blazes to life, and this time an army of skeletons rises together, their eyes glowing with fierce green light. From the observation deck, the researcher watches the growing horde below and admits that the younger generation is truly formidable. He tells Old Chen that even if Fang Zhou loses to Yifan today, his performance alone earns him a spot on the seed list. He warns Old Chen not to celebrate too soon. Old Chen narrows his eyes, insisting that Fang Zhou's calm and experienced temperament means he must still be hiding a trump card. Skeletons close in as Fang Zhou battles through them, blue energy trailing his blade. Yifan watches from the side, admitting quietly that he can't hold back any longer. Yifan raises his staff toward the sky, chanting the summon once more. Green energy erupts around him as he declares he is going full power, the magic circle beneath him blazing brighter than before. In the observation room, the researchers gasp at the sudden surge of 30 skeletons appearing at once. One wonders how a boy who only awakened days ago could have upgraded his skills so drastically. Surrounded by his growing undead army, Yifan tells Fang Zhou that only this level of ability makes him worthy of being called his rival. Fang Zhou pulls his hood tighter, studying the horde with narrowed eyes. He suspects that Yifan's calm composure while surrounded means he still has a hidden plan. Fang Zhou lunges forward with a fierce green strike, cutting through several skeletons as he charges toward Yifan with relentless speed and burning determination. Bones scatter across the floor from the destroyed skeletons. Yifan steadies himself among his remaining forces, deciding this distance should finally be enough to keep himself safe. Blue lightning crashes around Fang Zhou as he vanishes into the shadows, launching his shadow charge technique to close the gap instantly and strike from an unexpected angle. Back in the observation room, the green-haired researcher declares the match is over, certain that a mage caught in close combat can never withstand Yifan's assault. Old Lu says nothing, watching in silence. Fang Zhou reappears directly behind Yifan, unleashing his vengeance fierce strike, his blade glowing with deadly green force as he closes in for what looks like a finishing blow. A voice cuts through the chaos as Yifan calmly tells him he took the bait, his expression unreadable in the shadows. A massive bone shield erupts from the ground, absorbing the full force of Fang Zhou's strike and shattering the momentum of his attack completely. Startled, Fang Zhou pulls back and demands to know what skill this is, staring at the wall of bone that just saved Yifan from certain defeat. The researchers watch in disbelief, with Old Lu insisting it is impossible for the boy to have comprehended a brand new skill entirely on his own. Yifan admits calmly that Fang Zhou proved stronger than expected, so he needs to rely on tactics instead, gesturing towards several unclear shapes scattered across the arena floor. Fang Zhou reacts with alarm as one of the shapes suddenly moves, revealing that something unexpected has been set into motion around him. The researchers realize the truth together, with Old Lu grumbling that this kid's tactics are incredibly dirty. The reveal shows Yifan had used an optical camouflage cloth to hide himself among the skeletons, blending seamlessly into the crowd of undead the entire time. Frustrated, Fang Zhou scans the surrounding skeletons and admits he can't locate Yifan's real body anywhere among them, encircled by the undead horde. Fang Zhou shouts for Yifan to come out and face him directly, refusing to keep fighting blind against an enemy he cannot see. Green flames flare around Yifan's eyes as pressure builds around him. He grits his teeth, admitting that at this rate he'll be dragged down and killed, leaving him no choice but to use that move. A surge of blue-white energy shoots skyward, scattering nearby skeletons. In the observation room, the green-haired researcher gasps in disbelief that Yifan has already learned that skill at his level, while old Lu explains its cooldown is long but its burst damage and ability to disengage are extremely high. Yifan's eyes glow fierce blue-green as he locks onto one skeleton hidden among the crowd, declaring that he has finally found the one he is looking for. Rising into the air with his blade raised high, Fang Zhou channels every ounce of remaining strength into his Skyfall strike, shouting for Yifan to take the full force of his attack as he descends toward him. Yifan's eyes ignited with green flame as he roared in pain, his summoned skeleton army rising behind him. The horde surged forward, chanting the name of the incoming spell Skyfall Strike. A skull-faced figure watched calmly as the chant built into a deafening cry. A blinding beam tore down from above, slamming into the arena floor and detonating in a wave of green light. Smoke cleared over a fallen skeleton. Yifan stood over the wreckage, arrows and bone fragments scattered around him, declaring that despite his opponent's strength, his own pride would not let him accept defeat. Turning to the sidelines, he called for medical staff, insisting he had no wish to cause real injury. The observers behind the glass reacted strangely, a scientist pumping his fist, a bearded man crossing his arms, a woman waving her hands in alarm. Yifan caught the mismatch immediately. Those weren't the expressions of people watching a victory unfold. Confused, he approached the collapsed skeleton and froze. This wasn't Fang Zhou. The truth hit him like a blow. It wasn't a simple disguise. Fang Zhou had made a skeleton disguise itself as him disguising himself as a skeleton, a reverse trick layered on a double deception. Before he could process it, skeletal soldiers closed in from every side. Yifan cried out in alarm, caught completely off guard. From the shadows, the real Fang Zhou stepped forward, a glowing skull staff in hand, greeting Yifan by name and thanking him for letting him win. Yifan lowered his hands and conceded. The announcement rang out across the hall: Fang Zhou wins. Drained and breathless, Yifan admitted the spell had cost him everything he had left. One of Fang Zhou's skeletons steadied him before he could fall, and Yifan muttered a reluctant thanks. Fang Zhou flashed a grin and gave a thumbs up, calling it sympathy for the loser. Furious, Yifan vowed that failure would only fuel his future strength, swearing he'd return stronger. Fang Zhou simply shrugged it off as a joke, not worth the outrage. Professor Chen approached next, admitting reluctantly that Fang Zhou's combat ability had exceeded every expectation. He predicted Fang Zhou would become a tactical master, though Fang Zhou noted the compliment somehow didn't feel like one. Teacher Lu asked about the shield spell used during the match, wondering if it was something Fang Zhou had discovered on his own. Fang Zhou confirmed it. He explained that practicing his skeleton summons had led to 2 new skills, which he named Bone Javelin and Bone Shield. The bearded teacher grabbed him in excitement, praising the surprise, while Fang Zhou asked him to go easy. Qingshan suggested testing the new skills properly with the lab's equipment, and the teacher agreed to arrange it at once. Fang Zhou admitted his spirit power had run dry, doubting he could test the new skills at all. The bearded teacher waved off the concern, insisting it was nothing to worry about. He was startled to see crates of bottled recovery potions lined up, questioning whether his teacher was pouring them like draft beer. The teacher corrected him he was chugging it straight from the bottle. Fang Zhou downed one himself, draining it in seconds, while sparks of blue energy crackled around him. His teacher watched amused, remarking he'd never seen someone drink recovery potions like water. With his strength restored, the group gathered around a horned combat golem. Professor Chen confirmed the machine was ready, and Fang Zhou braced himself. The golem raised its fists, daring him to strike with his new skill just as he would in training. Fang Zhou answered with a simple nod. He extended his hand, summoning a spear built from stacked bone fragments, wreathed in blue light bone-flying spear. The spear launched forward and slammed into the golem in a burst of sparks. A readout above the arena flashed the result: attack ability 85. Professor Chen praised the number as remarkably high for a newly awakened student, noting to his colleague that the skill wasn't borrowed. Fang Zhou had created it himself. The bearded teacher announced the next test would measure the skill's defensive strength. Fang Zhou responded with a calm, yeah, eyes fixed on the golem. The golem lunged with a heavy punch. Fang Zhou threw up a glowing shield in response, absorbing the blow in a shower of sparks. Bone shield held firm, registering defense ability 80. Scribbling the numbers down, Professor Chen compared the results aloud. Attack on par with a storm mage. Defense matching an earth knight. The bearded teacher grabbed him with a booming laugh, declaring he was simply born to be a necromancer. Fang Zhou asked him to stop patting him, muttering that it looked like he was there just to pad his stats. Professor Chen suggested he register the new skills in the skill repository, calling them genuinely excellent work. Fang Zhou repeated the name back, unfamiliar with it. Walking among tall shelves, he explained it as a collection center run by the Federation, where anyone could trade contribution points for skills stored inside Professor Chen mentioned their institute kept a branch of the repository on site free for him to use whenever he liked. Fang Zhou thanked him for the trouble. Standing before a large wooden door, the teacher explained that once his skills were uploaded, he could immediately exchange his points for anything he needed. Fang Zhou acknowledged the explanation and thanked teacher Lu He, pushed the door open, only to find the space beyond pitch dark, questioning aloud why a skill library would be completely unlit. As his eyes adjusted, a vast chamber unfolded, towering shelves stretched endlessly in every direction, exactly as expected of a Federation-run repository reaching toward the glowing spines of the books. He noted that every skill he'd ever learned could be found somewhere on these shelves. He fed his 2 new skills into the system, watching them absorbed in a swirl of light. A notification confirmed the entry of Bone Javelin and Bone Shield, granting 200 contribution points, with a note that as their creator, he'd earn half of all future exchange fees. Fang Zhou smiled at the unexpected bonus continuous profit he hadn't seen coming. Standing among the endless shelves, Fang Zhou reasoned that entry into the skill repository was too rare a chance to waste on a quick trade. He decided to make the most of the visit before heading back. His hand moved along a row of spines and stopped on one titled Skeleton Meditation Technique. Pulling it free from the shelf, holding the book, he felt it dissolve into swirling blue and green light, its knowledge folding into him. A notice appeared, confirming 100 points of soul power, now available for skill deduction. Fang Zhou grinned, already planning to use the borrowed techniques as a blueprint for deductions of his own. Back inside the skill repository, a green prompt surfaced beside Fang Zhou, detecting an upgradable version of Skeleton Meditation Method, and asking whether he wanted to spend soul power on the improvement. He tapped yes without hesitation. Dark tendrils swirled around him as a heavy pressure built in the air. A nearby voice remarked on the sheer weight of death radiating from him. Crimson light streaked down from a crowned skull looming above, and the technique's name blazed across the scene, confirming the upgrade had succeeded. The skeletal figure extended a jeweled tome toward him. Fang Zhou stared at it, uncertain, before realizing the offering was meant for him. He accepted the book, and turquoise energy exploded outward, wrapping his entire body in swirling light. The crowned specter towered behind him as the new title flared into view: Skeleton Monarch Meditation Method, sealing the transformation. A description unfurled above his head, explaining that the modified technique doubled his meditation speed and strengthened every undead skill he possessed. Fang Zhou noted with satisfaction that this time, none of his soul power had gone to waste. Still, he reminded himself that raw power meant nothing without spirit power to fuel it, recalling how close he'd come to running dry during his fight against Yifan. Walking further into the repository, he considered his surplus of contribution points, deciding to put them toward a skill that could restore his reserves. He pointed toward a glowing shelf and selected Presence of Mind, spending 20 points to claim it. A meditating silhouette appeared before him as the book's effects unfolded, passively boosting spirit power recovery, with an active use that could restore even more on demand. A prompt warned him the skill carried a steep learning curve, though he brushed the concern aside, confident it wouldn't slow him down. He accepted the offer to burn 10 soul points and reach the entry stage instantly. Blue light coiled around the pages as the system confirmed his success. Presence of Mind had reached its entry stage. He tested it at once, watching blue energy ripple from his fist, pleased at how noticeably faster his spirit power now recovered. Studying the shelves around him, he mused that if he faced Yifan again now, he could bury him beneath an endless wave of skeletons. He gathered 4 more tomes: Vine Entanglement, Swamp Spell, Earth Wall Spell, and Spiderweb Spell, spending 60 points to add them as reference material for future upgrades. Moving to a display case, he reminded himself that skill alone wouldn't carry him far without gear to match. Noting that his current rank only allowed gray-white grade equipment, he spent 40 points, and the exchange confirmed instantly. A mage hat, a necklace, and a pair of rings materialized around him, each offering small boosts to spirit power, recovery speed, or cooldown reduction. A final notification chimed. The completed Mage Apprentice 4 P-set granted a 10% boost to both cultivation speed and skill proficiency growth, closing out his haul from the repository. With the exchange complete, Fang Zhou noted with satisfaction that his upgrade speed would only climb faster from here. A status window unfolded in front of him, listing his growing arsenal: skeleton meditation method, summon skeleton, bone javelin, bone shield, and presence of mind. He admitted the haul had exceeded expectations. The Federation's repository lived up to its reputation. A towering skeletal warrior materialized beside him, twin skull heads glowing with blue fire, catching him off guard for a moment. He caught himself, realizing his skeleton clone would need proper skills of its own to match his growth. 3 more tomes flew off the shelves: Weapon Mastery Block and Battle Cry, each one essential for the clone's combat readiness, costing him 30 more points. Holding the last of his purchases, he grumbled that the repository's generosity came at a steep price. Wondering if he'd ever find such a favorable arrangement again, back at the Demon Hunter Research Association, a colleague asked about his trip. Fang Zhou confirmed the results had been substantial. Nearby, Yifan's voice cut through the air, declaring flatly that he refused to accept the outcome of their last match. He shoved a recovery potion toward Fang Zhou, demanding a rematch now that he understood what had beaten him. Fang Zhou asked if he was certain, reminding him that his skills had just been upgraded. Yifan clenched his fists, insisting he wouldn't spend his life bowing to someone else's strength, vowing to fight with everything he had this time. A nearby teacher noted the rematch would count as extra training, meaning extra contribution points would be owed. Another shrugged it off, certain Yifan would end up covering the cost regardless. Fang Zhou tossed the potion back, telling him to save it for later, prompting a startled reaction from Yifan. Rushing forward, Yifan shouted his opponent's name and unleashed his strongest attack immediately. Skyfall Strike tore through the air in a streak of green light. Watching from the side, the bearded teacher observed that Yifan's instinct for combat remained sharp, noting a fast strike was still his best path to victory. Fang Zhou raised a hand as a massive summoning circle spread beneath his feet, curious how his opponent would react to his newly gained power. A woman among the onlookers gasped, questioning whether it was still just a simple summon skeleton spell. The bearded teacher shouted a denial, eyes widening as he took in the sheer number rising from the circle. An endless column of skeletons surged skyward, and someone cried out that the scale of it was completely wrong for any ordinary summon. The horde slammed down in a blinding explosion of green light, shaking the entire arena. As the dust settled, the researchers marveled at the destruction, remarking that the power had grown even stronger than before. All because Yifan had pushed himself to comprehend and upgrade his own skill during their previous clash. Yifan's face twisted in disbelief as he acknowledged the strike had hit far harder than the last one. Fang Zhou walked calmly through the wreckage of collapsed skeletons, admitting his own skills had grown stronger too. As Yifan called out his name in protest, he shrugged it off as just a tiny improvement. A wave of bone soldiers closed in on Yifan, who flinched in alarm. Someone shouted a warning not to hit the face, and the arena erupted in a blinding cloud of dust. When the smoke cleared, the researchers called the sparring session to an end, noting dryly that Yifan wouldn't be fit to train again for a week. One of the teachers turned to Fang Zhou, asking whether he had any real intention of founding his own Necromancer Research Association. Fang Zhou brushed off the idea with a flat no. Alone with his thoughts, he reasoned that letting anyone dig into his abilities risked exposing the system behind his power, a complication he had no interest in inviting. Elsewhere, deep inside the skill repository, a hooded figure paused mid-stride, drawn by a faint disturbance in the air. The woman's eyes narrowed as violet energy coiled around her hand, stunned that a necromancer had actually managed to register a brand new skill in the system. Inside a quiet library, Su Xinyan reached for a book on the shelf, spending 20 contribution points to unlock a new entry from the skill repository. She flipped through the pages and read aloud the names of 2 skills, marveling that a class as overlooked as Necromancer could produce spells this refined. Clutching the book to her chest, she rushed out of the library, eager to share the discovery with her father. Meanwhile, in the principal's office, a visitor's arrival drew a pointed question about why he kept returning. Teacher Lu leaned over the desk and pushed his request again, insisting that Fang Zhou deserved a spot on the seed list, with another man backing him up from behind. The principal took a slow sip of tea and dismissed the idea, arguing that a necromancer's early performance meant little without stronger skills to grow into later. Teacher Lu countered that the student had already grasped 2 necromancer skills entirely on his own. The principal remained unmoved, stating that comprehension alone meant nothing if the resulting effects weren't strong. His attention shifting toward the door as Su Xinyan appeared. She burst in, holding up the book and announcing that 2 new necromancer skills had just appeared in the repository. Her father's expression sharpened at the words, repeating the term back to her with open suspicion. Green light flared around her as she summoned the spells to demonstrate, explaining that she'd only studied them briefly and hadn't fully mastered them, yet their power was already obvious. Curious, her father asked if she knew who had actually developed these skills. Her expression lit up as she declared she wanted to make that person her master. Later, beneath an open sky, her father's voice carried a warning that she couldn't take him as her master, prompting her to ask why. He paused before answering, explaining simply that the boy was still just a student, while elsewhere a young man sat in quiet meditation. In an empty lecture hall, a red-headed rival barged forward, demanding a fight, only for someone else nearby to ask flatly whether it was happening again. Feng Zhou remained seated, unbothered, wondering aloud how many times he'd already been challenged, and suggesting his rival focus on cultivating instead. The rival grinned, claiming this time would be different, while a girl beside him reacted with confusion. He boasted that days spent training with Bei Xiaocan had pushed his strength forward by leaps and bounds, certain he could win this time, while she snapped back that she'd only agreed to help after he begged her publicly. Fang Zhou asked what exactly she'd done to help him improve, and the girl answered with a smirk that while he was sleeping, she had comprehended a highly useful support skill called Lullaby. Bai Xiaocan explained that her skill could quicken spirit power recovery and boost the results of meditation or training. She added a catch. The skill only worked 3 times a day, while the red-headed rival admitted he'd spent 2 contribution points every week just for a shot at using it. Fang Zhou sat unimpressed, silently questioning whether his rival planned to spend his whole life paying off debts. As the man declared, he finally had the confidence to win this round. A thought flickered through Fang Zhou's mind. Instead, if the skill boosted meditation and training, would it work on his skeleton clone as well? He reached out and gripped Xiao Chan's arm, asking directly if she'd sell him her remaining uses of Lullaby for the day, ignoring his rival's protest at being brushed aside. Green light burst from his hand as he summoned a pair of skeletons on the spot. He tossed the summons toward his rival, telling him to play with them first and settle the contribution points once he was done, provoking an outraged accusation of being looked down on. Turning to Xiao Can, Fang Zhou asked her plainly to use Lullaby on him, and she agreed. Musical light coiled around her voice as the melody wrapped around him, sending him down into a meditative trance across the divide. In the blood-lit expanse of the undead realm, his skeleton clone sat cross-legged beneath a crimson moon wreathed in the same spectral current. The clone rose, confirming aloud that Lullaby's effect had carried through to influence it as well. A status panel flickered into view, listing the clone's rank, attributes, equipped bone spear, and its growing list of mastered and grasped combat skills. The skeleton lord surveyed 2 lesser skeletons nearby, deciding they'd make perfect test subjects for measuring the clone's new capabilities. One of the underlings swung a spiked mace down in a heavy arc, only for the clone's spear to flash forward to meet it. The block held firm as parry activated, the skill's mechanics flaring in green, a defensive stance that reduced incoming damage based on constitution and proficiency. Weapon mastery ignited next, sharpening the spear's edge with practiced precision. The clone twisted mid-motion as its weapon shifted shape, transforming to adapt to the fight. A beam of light shot from its skull as it called out the release, unleashing the stored force in one motion. The spear reversed direction and thrust backward, catching its target completely off guard with the sudden change in angle. Standing amid the wreckage, the skeleton lord absorbed the residual energy, noting with satisfaction that even the system's rewards had risen by 10%, proof that Lullaby was nothing short of a divine skill, as small notifications confirmed gains to strength and soul power. A trio of undead brutes closed in from the ruined battlefield, only for a spear thrust to cut through their advance. The clone spun through the strike, each hit registering another notch of strength and soul power, the numbers stacking as fast as the blows landed. One of the skeletons paused mid-swing, muttering in disbelief that an entire undead legion still stood before them, then trailing off into a wary. Then, the clone's eyes blazed white as it roared a challenge, daring the whole group to come at it together and calling them nothing but scum. A massive figure let out a booming cry that rippled outward, triggering Battle Cry, a skill that temporarily boosted strength, constitution, and agility, with the duration and intensity tied to strength and proficiency. Surrounded by rising skeleton reinforcements, the clone let out its own thunderous shout, attribute gains flashing again and again as it declared it would grow even stronger. Its gaze snapped toward something in the distance, confusion giving way to shock as it took in what it was actually looking at. A colossal winged figure descended with a massive blade in hand, identified as the Bone Angel, and the clone could only stare stunned that a boss-tier enemy had spawned directly inside the beginner village. A towering skeletal figure with massive wings raised a greatsword high into the blood-red sky, the blade catching the light before the strike began. Below, a smaller cloaked skeleton stood alone on the battlefield, watching the colossal weapon descend. The winged skeleton's blue eyes burned as he admitted the truth of his situation. If the incoming strike connected, it would end him instantly. There was no room for hesitation. Since blocking such an attack was pointless, he chose a different path. He would meet the danger head on and strike first, hurling himself directly at his approaching enemy instead of retreating. A war cry tore through the air as his skull ignited with crackling blue energy, lightning dancing around his fractured bones. The fury building inside him demanded release. He launched a bone spear, the projectile streaking forward with deadly precision. Using the armor breaker style, the spear found its mark, punching through defenses that should have held. A swirling green vortex formed around his weapon as he channeled his next technique, the Phantom Strike, gathering power into a single devastating point. The strike connected with brutal force. A chain of explosions rippled across his opponent's arm, each blast tearing through bone using the arm destruction style, one detonation after another. His towering enemy reeled backward from the assault, wings flaring wide. Confusion rippled through the giant as he tried to process what had just happened and what his opponent intended next. Despite the damage, the giant skeleton's decisiveness caught everyone off guard. He surged forward instantly, his massive hand cutting through the air with terrifying speed and resolve. The larger figure swung his blade down with overwhelming force. His smaller opponent barely had time to react, gripping his spear tightly as the enormous weapon closed in. He met the blow directly, parrying the massive sword with his own blade. Sparks scattered as steel screeched against steel, the impact shaking through both fighters. The clash sent shockwaves rippling outward. A green streak sliced through the air, meeting a blue burst of energy head on, the two forces colliding in a violent explosion of light. Pain registered across the smaller skeleton's face as he cried out. The force of the exchange had taken its toll, cracks spreading further along his already damaged frame. The giant advanced slowly, wings trailing smoke behind him. His opponent noted grimly that shattering one of the giant's arms earlier had been the only thing that saved him. Without that damage, the blow he'd just taken would have completely destroyed his bones. A glint of blue light flickered in the giant's eye. His opponent realized something important. The exposed wound had also revealed the giant's weak point, a vulnerability he hadn't noticed before. The giant skeleton lifted his blade high, confusion flashing in his glowing eyes as he wondered what his opponent was planning next. Something about his stance had shifted. Without warning, he began to spin, his body wrapped in a swirling tornado of golden energy. The sudden rotation caught his opponent completely off guard. Realization struck hard. This was bad. The giant had found a way to compensate for his crippled arm, gathering momentum through the spin itself, energy building with every rotation. He was using centrifugal force to make up for the power lost with his damaged arm, aiming to smash the entire mountain in one motion. Worse, the constant spinning made it impossible to target his exposed weak point any longer. Yellow targeting reticles locked onto the smaller skeleton as the giant's spinning attack curved toward him again. The spinning giant chased him relentlessly across the battlefield until he found himself boxed in by jagged crimson cliffs. He cursed under his breath, realizing he had run straight into a dead end with nowhere left to retreat. Cornered, he understood there was only one path forward. With sparks crackling around his blue-lit skull, he gripped his staff of skulls tightly and admitted he had no choice but to risk everything on his next move. The giant's blade sliced through the air with such force that its wind alone could tear flesh and shatter bone. He forced himself to stay calm, watching closely, knowing his survival depended on catching the right moment. Inside the storm of golden light, his golden eyes narrowed as he found what he needed. He had spotted an opening in his opponent's spinning assault. He dashed forward instantly, blue flame trailing behind him as he closed the distance, his body a blur of motion aimed straight at his towering enemy. The giant roared as the smaller skeleton's blade connected, the impact ringing out sharply against his massive frame. With calm mockery, he pointed out the flaw in his opponent's design, a massive body-concealing brittle bones, telling him he ought to go home and get more calcium. Beneath the cracked armor, a pulsing blue light revealed itself. The Soulfire Core. The giant's true source of power had been exposed at last. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He summoned a bone javelin, launching it directly toward that glowing weakness. The projectile struck true sparks and flame, bursting from the point of impact as the javelin drove into the exposed core. The giant flinched, wings flaring in alarm as the pain registered. The javelin had done exactly what it was meant to do, regaining his composure mid-air. The giant's wings beat hard against the wind. His opponent watched from below and murmured that he had suspected this all along. Rising through the swirling golden light, he addressed his enemy directly. Those wings, he said, could never have been merely decorative. But unfortunately for him, that advantage would not be enough. A grin spread across his skull as 3 hexagonal icons flared to life around him. His system, he declared, wasn't just for show either. He was merging and deducing a new skill by combining Spiderweb spell with Bone Armament. The deduction completed successfully, forming Bonebind and Apprentice, rank skill capable of condensing undead magic into solid restraints. Lightning gathered at his fingertip as he addressed the winged giant above him, asking with quiet menace whether he liked flying. Chains of bone and lightning erupted with a deafening crack, catching the giant completely off guard mid-flight. The restraints tightened around him, chains wrapping across his massive form as his captor commanded him to fall. The chains yanked downward with tremendous force, dragging the giant from the sky. His captor's voice cut through the chaos, ordering him straight to the ground. Approaching the restrained giant, he warned him calmly not to resist, explaining that resistance would only make things worse for him. The more his enemy struggled against the chains, the more excited he admitted he became. Standing atop the fallen giant's massive skull, he gazed at the blue flame pulsing before him and murmured the name of what he'd claimed, Bone Angel's Soul Fire. Without a shred of doubt, he reached out and absorbed the flame, declaring that he would take it without hesitation. The blue fire poured into him, merging with his very essence. A notification flared to life around him. Soul power had increased by 100, yet he frowned, confused that despite gaining so much, his body hadn't grown any stronger. Something didn't add up. Reading the strange notification beside him, understanding dawned. He had already reached his lineage's limit, which explained why his attributes had stopped climbing no matter how much power he absorbed. Lying against the jagged rocks, exhausted from the battle, he stared up at the churning red sky and voiced a quiet longing. He wanted to know what lay beyond it, and he wanted to see it for himself. A new prompt materialized before him, laying out his path forward. His current lineage was Skeleton at Apprentice rank, with an evolution path leading to Skeleton Warrior at Black Iron rank. The cost was clear, 100 soul power points. He made his decision without hesitation, declaring that his evolution path had officially begun. Blue and green energy erupted around him, swallowing his skeletal frame entirely as the transformation took hold. A tremendous surge of blue and black energy tore through the underworld as a skeletal figure roared in agony. Deep within its bones, a truth was being carved into its very existence. The path of death was the path of slaughter. The transformation completed. Where a simple skeleton once stood, a towering warrior now emerged, flanked by 2 serpent-like skulls fused to its shoulders. The system confirmed it plainly. Skeleton Warrior evolution successful. With the change came a surge of raw power. Every core attribute jumped by 30 points at once, an attribute leap that pushed strength, constitution, agility, and spirit far beyond what the creature had known before. The evolved skeleton paused, sensing something new beneath the surface of its growth. It questioned whether this stronger form carried a hidden gift, and the answer came instantly. Evolution successful. The talent revealed itself in full Skeleton King Apprentice rank, an innate blessing granted by the will of the undead world itself, reserved only for the strongest of the skeleton bloodline. It sharpened the damage dealt to fellow skeletons and their evolved kin. Understanding dawned as the creature moved through the ruined battlefield, one of its serpent heads scanning for prey. It recognized the talent for what it was, a specialized advantage against its own kind, one that would let it clear through the undead world faster than before. The moment came fast. A bone was hurled, striking true, and the fight that followed ended almost as quickly as it began. The evolved warrior stood over the fallen skeleton, its enhanced power making short work of what would once have been a real threat. The results spoke for themselves. Damage taken had already dropped so low that low-level skeletons no longer required any real defense at all. What once demanded caution had become routine. Deeper power waited to be claimed. A prompt appeared, tied to the bloodline's continued ascension. Even the bone armament itself could be upgraded. The choice sat there, yes or no, waiting on a decision. Elsewhere, a plain skeleton crackled with wild blue lightning, caught in the surge of its own sudden change, letting out a confused sound as the energy coursed through its frame. The upgrade completed. Bone armor had unlocked, merging fully with the warrior's body. Forged from bone essence, the armor offered only a slight boost to physical defense, but the warrior could feel the difference immediately, declaring that its power had grown by a noticeable margin. Turning toward a smaller skeleton huddled against the rocks, the armored warrior offered something close to an apology before making its intentions clear. It needed a subject to test its newfound skills, and the smaller skeleton could only cry out in alarm as the encounter began. The attack came as a burst of light and speed, a spinning kick trailing white energy. Even mid-strike, the warrior mused aloud, wondering if the strange sound the other skeleton made meant time itself was being measured. The smaller skeleton reeled from the blow, clutching its skull and stammering out broken wordless sounds, dazed and disoriented from the force of the attack. The ground cracked apart as the fight escalated, bone fragments scattering through the air. The warrior offered a quiet apology for disappointing its opponent, noting that it had barely let loose the wind behind its fist. The bone armor had clearly done its work, sharply increasing the damage it could deal to other skeletons. Yet the gains told a different story. Strength rose by a fraction, soul power by slightly more, numbers too small to matter. The warrior admitted that killing weak monsters in this region no longer raised its level at all. Standing over the wreckage beneath a blood-red moon, the warrior looked toward the horizon. It concluded that it needed to press further into the deeper regions of the undead world where real challenges still waited. Its eyes narrowed with focus, the weight of that decision settling in. Sitting back at last, hands pressed together in exhaustion, the warrior muttered a complaint about how long the boss fight had dragged on. Far away, a young man jolted upright, blood streaking down his face, gasping sharply as his consciousness snapped back into his own body. A silver-haired woman steadied Feng Zhou by the arm, worry crossing her face as she asked if he was okay, noting that he had been injured during meditation only moments earlier. He responded with a confused sound, caught off guard by her concern. Blood ran down his face as he recalled the source of the injury, a memory of a skeletal figure crackling with blue lightning flashing behind him. He admitted to himself that he had been hurt fighting the boss earlier, and told himself he couldn't afford to be so reckless again. Facing the woman directly, Feng Zhou raised a hand to stop her from pressing further, and assured her that he was fine, claiming he had simply run into some trouble during meditation. She started to object, clearly unconvinced. In a classroom setting, a voice called out his name. Feng Zhou turned toward it, answering with a short, questioning sound. A red-haired young man stepped forward with a challenging stance, green energy crackling around his fists as he addressed Feng Zhou directly, bringing up the skeletons he had summoned before. The red-haired man's expression hardened as he declared that those skeletons could no longer hold him back. He leapt into the air, fists glowing with power, demanding that Feng Zhou fight him honorably, face to face without relying on his summons. Feng Zhou raised his hand calmly and activated Bonebind, and glowing green chains shot out and wrapped around his opponent instantly. The red-haired man was yanked off his feet, crying out in shock as the chains pulled taut around his limbs. Suspended and helpless, the young man protested that the fight wasn't fair, since Feng Zhou had used a skill he had never seen before, demanding a rematch. Feng Zhou simply told him to come back once he had gathered enough contribution points. Onlookers murmured among themselves, wondering if Bonebind was a skill Feng Zhou had created on his own, while the bound man begged to be untied. Watching the whole exchange, the silver-haired woman stared after Feng Zhou, quietly wondering just how far his strength had actually grown. Later, Feng Zhou climbed a stairway toward a rooftop as a bell rang out in the distance. Checking his phone, he noted that Friday had arrived quickly. Standing at the edge of the rooftop with the sunset behind him, he reflected that since his powers had awakened, he had been too consumed with growing stronger to return home in a long while. The scene shifted to a tall building marked as the Resource Exchange Department, its windows catching the evening light. Inside, a staff member greeted him and asked if he needed assistance. Feng Zhou requested help converting 10 contribution points into 100,000 Dragon Sha coins. The staff member remarked that contribution points were hard to come by and asked if it wasn't a waste to convert them into money. Feng Zhou replied simply that it was fine. He needed the money. Now the transaction concluded with a briefcase changing hands. The staff member wished him well and offered to help with future exchanges. Feng Zhou thanked her, Holding the briefcase, he thought to himself that with this amount, the situation for certain people should improve, if only a little. The setting changed to Cloud Orphanage, where children ran and played through a garden path, calling out to each other as a caretaker warned them not to fall. A woman with long brown hair stood watching the children with a fond smile, remarking on how much energy they had and wondering how many of them would awaken their powers. Behind her, Fang Zhou approached, carrying his briefcase. A child's voice called out to her as Sister Ru Fang Zhou stepped further into the yard, greeted warmly as the children called his name. With a briefcase in one hand and a heavy sack in the other, he smiled and confirmed simply that he was back. The children rushed toward Fang Zhou the moment he stepped into the yard, shouting that Brother Xiao Zhou was back and asking if he had brought anything delicious. Ru studied him for a moment, then asked about the awakening test his school had held, wanting to know the result. Fang Zhou answered that he had succeeded and was now a necromancer. Ru smiled, telling him that successfully awakening was the only thing that mattered. One of the children overheard and repeated the class name aloud, amazed. Another declared it sounded cool and said he wanted to summon a skeleton of his own. Fang Zhou raised his hand and green light burst forward as two small skeletal figures appeared, summoned in a miniature version built just for play. The children swarmed the tiny skeletons immediately, laughing and calling them fun, fighting over who got to hold the skull first. Turning to Ru, Fang Zhou handed her a briefcase, explaining that it was meant for the orphanage director. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the yard, commenting on what a heartwarming scene it made. Both Fang Zhou and Ru turned toward the interruption, caught off guard. A tall, tattooed man in a red shirt strolled up the path, hands in his pockets, wondering aloud whether his arrival had just interrupted their private moment. A group of strangers gathered outside the Cloud Orphanage, standing along the road in dark suits. A resident inside noticed the crowd and grew uneasy, wondering who they were and why they had come. A young woman named Su Roru stepped forward to confront the men, demanding to know why they had shown up when she had already promised repayment within a few days. The leader of the group grabbed Roru by the wrist without warning, yanking her forward and accusing her of stalling on her debt to the Tiger Claw gang. The sudden grip forced a pained sound from her as she was pulled off balance. The gang leader announced that the day marked the final deadline for repayment, warning that failure to pay would bring consequences. He declared that if the debt went unpaid, the land the orphanage had used as collateral would be seized and handed over to the Tiger Claw gang nearby. Two young children sat unaware of the danger closing in around their home. One of the orphanage's children, a small girl named Roru, called out as the gang leader stormed further into the courtyard, laughing as he approached. Another child rushed toward him, shouting for him not to lay a hand on her. The girl was struck without hesitation, sent flying from a swift kick. The woman watching from the side cried out her name in horror as the small body was thrown through the air. Before the man could strike again, a skeletal figure wrapped in a tattered red cloak intercepted the blow, catching his leg mid-kick and halting the attack cold. The impact staggered him as the child stood protected behind the bony guardian. The gang leader stumbled back, stunned by the sudden appearance of the undead protector, demanding to know what the creature was. Nearby, the black-haired young man closed his eyes in concentration, a glowing skull hovering just beneath his chin. The young man, calm and imposing in his long coat, rested a hand on the girl's head and issued a quiet ultimatum: apologize or face the consequences for what had just happened. The girl looked up at him, speaking his name with relief. One of the gang members leaned in to warn his boss, revealing that the young man standing before them was a necromancer. The leader's eyes narrowed at the word, repeating it as though weighing whether it mattered. A memory surfaced of the past of a fighter known as the Ghost-faced martial artist, Liu Hu, unleashing a devastating strike wrapped in flame. A mocking voice dismissed the necromancer class as worthless trash. Back in the present, the young man's expression stayed unreadable as he questioned aloud whether Liu Hu himself held a proper class, testing the weight behind the gang leader's confidence. Ruru pulled him aside afterward, wanting to know exactly who these men were. He revealed they represented the Tiger Claw Training Equipment Company, a business that supplied training devices for class holders. She explained further that the orphanage's director and she had taken out a loan in advance to buy equipment so the children's training wouldn't be delayed. What looked like an ordinary equipment business on the surface was, in truth, she admitted that compounding interest had left the orphanage far short of what it owed, and he pressed her, frustrated that she hadn't told him about the debt sooner. When he turned back to confront the gang leader directly, the man scoffed, telling him to mind his own business and reminding him that a debt of 100,000 Dragon Xia coins was not something he could simply afford to cover. Without a word of explanation, he tossed a leather briefcase through the air toward the stunned gang leader, who barely reacted in time to catch it. He stated plainly that the case held the full 100,000 Dragon Xia coins and told them to leave. Ruru, equally shocked, asked where he had managed to get that much money. The gang leader popped the case open and found it packed with cash exactly as claimed, muttering in disbelief to his subordinate that it truly was 100,000 boss. Who hurled his cup aside and screamed for silence, his temper flaring instantly. He revealed the real motive behind his aggression, admitting his own boss had ordered him to secure the orphanage's land, making the 100,000 coins already paid completely irrelevant to him. He pointed his weapon at Fang Zhou, sneering that the money meant nothing to him, mere pocket change compared to what he was truly after. Fang Zhou reminded him coldly that the debt had already been settled in full, questioning what more he could possibly want. Boss Hu raised his palm and invented a new number on the spot, declaring that because the payments had been delayed for so long, the orphanage now owed 500,000 Dragon Xia coins instead. Ruru's voice cracked in disbelief at the sudden, impossible figure. Fang Zhou's expression turned sharp as he realized the gang had never intended to accept payment at all, understanding now that they had come looking for a fight from the very start. Boss Hu straightened up and roared his justification, calling the orphanage's occupants worthless outsiders who had no right to hold on to such valuable land. He ordered his men forward, declaring that the Tiger Claw gang would seize the land that very day. His subordinates grinned and laughed, eager to move in on command. Fang Zhou's eyes glowed with power as he mocked their numbers game, recognizing they intended to overwhelm him through sheer force. Across from him, one gang member exhaled smoke and prepared himself, sensing the same surge of energy building in the air. A wave of undead soldiers rose behind Fang Zhou, their eyes burning green with summoned magic. He commanded them coolly, ordering the gang to drop to their knees and apologize, killing intent radiating from the gathered skeletons. Standing amid the glowing horde, Fang Zhou issued his warning without raising his voice, promising that refusal would bring consequences no one in front of him wanted to face. One gang member scoffed at the display, insisting necromancers ranked among the weakest class holders and that any ordinary fighter could smash through summoned bones with ease. Boss Hu ordered his men to throw every unwanted bystander off the property, sneering that people so lowly had no business dreaming of becoming class holders. Chaos erupted across the orphanage grounds as his men shoved children and staff aside without mercy. A small girl sat crying, calling out desperately for anyone to come save them from the men tearing through their home. Fang Zhou's fury broke through as he shouted a command, ordering his summoned forces to scatter and spread across the battlefield to meet the gang head. One thug laughed as he swung his weapon, taunting that a pile of bones could never stop them. Another rallied his companions, urging them to prove exactly what they were capable of against the undead defenders. A gang member lunged at one of the skeletons with a spiked club raised high, screaming for it to die as he brought the weapon down. The skeleton's eyes blazed with blue fire as it absorbed the blow and answered with a devastating strike, catching its attacker midair with brutal force. The thug screamed in agony as the skeleton crushed his hand, blood spraying from the injury. He stared in horror, unable to comprehend how ordinary summoned bones could hit with such overwhelming strength. Boss Hu narrowed his eyes at the scene, questioning aloud how a mere student could command skeletons with power far beyond what any necromancer should possess. Boss Hu launched himself into the air, weapon crackling with his signature technique, boasting that no measly necromancer could ever stand against him as he unleashed his bone shatter strike toward Fang Zhou. Ruru screamed out a warning, urging Fang Zhou to dodge the incoming attack before it struck him down. A massive skeletal defender rose in front of Fang Zhou, forming a solid barrier of bone that caught Boss Hu's spinning weapon head-on. The bone shield absorbed the full weight of the strike, stopping the attack cold before it could reach its target. Boss Hu froze in disbelief, staring at the shield that had stopped his signature technique without breaking. He could barely process what he had just witnessed, unable to accept that his strike had actually been blocked. Skeletal chains shot forward and wrapped around Boss Hu's arms and torso, yanking him off balance in mid-air. The bone bind coiled tight around his limbs as he demanded to know what kind of power this was. The chains tightened and slammed him down with tremendous force, driving him into the ground hard enough to crack the stone beneath him. He coughed violently from the impact, blood and dust rising around his crumpled body as Fang Zhou stood over the wreckage. Boss Hu forced himself back up, rage twisting his features as he screamed threats at Fang Zhou, swearing to kill him for the humiliation he had just suffered. More skeletal warriors surged forward behind him, closing in with weapons raised. Boss Hu's confidence cracked as the full weight of the undead force bore down, his scream turning from fury into something closer to panic. Fang Zhou's silhouette loomed over him, eyes glowing cold blue as he delivered his final demand. He ordered Boss Hu to kneel and apologize, warning that refusal would leave him with only one alternative: death.